Hey guys! Tonight we're heading back nearly 2,000 years to a place where stone, sunlight, and geometry meet, the Roman Empire at its confident peak. You stand on a hill just outside a growing city, the air still cool with morning dew, and below you stretches a landscape that seems to breathe. In the distance, olive trees sway like quiet green smoke, and a few shepherds wave lazily, their flocks moving as slowly as clouds. The faint hum of cicadas hasn't started yet, and for a brief moment, it's just you, the wind, and the distant chatter of Roman engineers debating over a wooden tripod. They're surveying the land, and tonight, so are you. You probably won't survive the labor part of this journey. Romans didn't have health insurance or ergonomic shovels, but you'll get to see how one of the greatest feats of ancient engineering begins, the building of a Roman aqueduct, step by careful step. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment with your location and local time. I love seeing where you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge up the hill beside the surveyors. Their tunics are simple, stained with dust and sweat, but their hands are steady as they position the groma, a cross-shaped instrument balanced on a stand. It looks deceptively simple, just a few hanging plumb lines on a wooden cross, yet with it, Roman engineers align straight lines across miles of uneven land. You hold your breath as one of them peers down the site and adjusts his footing by a fraction of an inch. The others follow the signal, driving small wooden stakes into the ground, marking the line like a trail of breadcrumbs leading toward the horizon. "Don't sneeze," one of them mutters, deadpan. You almost laugh, but you realize he's serious. A wrong angle here could mean the water won't flow, and all this effort would be wasted. That's the quiet genius of Roman aqueducts. They're built on gravity alone. No pumps, no motors, just the perfect slope. Usually just a few centimeters of drop per 100 meters, guiding the water smoothly toward its destination. Too steep, and the flow erodes the channel. Too shallow, and it stagnates. Historians still argue whether Roman engineers used instinct or advanced geometry to achieve such precision, but either way, the results were astonishing. You watch as they measure again, pacing out distances, squinting into the sunlight. Their wax tablets are filled with notes and tiny sketches, a kind of ancient engineering spreadsheet. One of the assistants carries a korobates, a long wooden plank with a water trough carved down its length, a simple but effective level. When the water sits perfectly still, they know the ground is even. You crouch beside it, noticing the tiny air bubbles trembling in the surface tension. It's a reminder that even in 100 BCE, science didn't need to be fancy. It just needed to work. The day stretches on, and the team continues to chart their path, moving from hilltop to valley floor. Occasionally, they pause to snack on olives, bread, and maybe a bit of cheese. You're invited to sit, and the stone beneath you is warm from the sun. A donkey brays somewhere in the distance, probably annoyed it has to carry the wooden poles again. You take a deep breath, the smell of crushed herbs and dry grass mingling with the faint tang of iron tools. This, you realize, is how every aqueduct begins, not with grandeur, but with patience. As the sun climbs higher, the engineers fan out, shouting distances in Latin you can only half follow. They're tracing the best route toward the city below, always searching for that subtle downward slope. One man carries a long rope marked with knots, each a Roman foot in length. You can't help but imagine the chaos if someone tied a new knot in the wrong place. There's probably a joke about rope inflation among Roman surveyors. A mainstream historical fact slips into your mind here. Roman aqueducts stretched over 420 kilometers in total across the empire, feeding cities like Rome, Nimes, and Segovia. Some of those lines still exist today, their stones weathered but standing, silent proof of a civilization obsessed with precision and cleanliness. But there's also a quirky tidbit, something lesser known. Some surveyors were said to use a vine sighting method when tools weren't available. stretching a straight vine between two stakes to visualize a line. It sounds a bit too rustic, but it shows the mix of ingenuity and improvisation that defined Roman construction. You walk along the marked route, imagining how this line will one day become a living artery of water. For now, it's only scratches in the dirt and whispers of measurement. But every few meters, someone marks a tiny number in the soil, a code for the next stage of construction. By late afternoon, the light turns soft, and the air thickens with the scent of stone dust. You hear the foreman call out for the team to pack up. He glances over the landscape with quiet satisfaction. The first phase is done. The line is marked, the slope confirmed, and tomorrow they'll start choosing the water source. You pause to look back from where you started. The stakes form a barely visible trail, weaving gently through the land like the outline of a sleeping serpent. It's humbling to think that this seemingly invisible path will soon become something monumental, an aqueduct carrying clean, cold water across miles of countryside, feeding fountains, baths, and bakeries in a bustling Roman town. But tonight, as dusk falls, it's just a dream in the dirt. The team begins to descend the hill, and you follow, listening to the creak of leather sandals and the low murmur of conversation. Someone jokes about the gods disliking crooked lines. Another swears the last surveyor lost his gromma to a goat. You can't tell if it's true, but you smile anyway, because even in the world's most advanced ancient civilization, some things never change: work, laughter, and the occasional complaint about equipment. At the bottom of the slope, a small campfire flickers. The engineers sit in a circle, eating lentils and salted fish, washing it down with thin wine. You join them quietly, feeling the heat of the fire on your skin. The stars emerge one by one, brighter than any modern street lamp could ever allow. The chief engineer, the architectus aquarum, clears his throat and makes a note in his wax tablet by firelight. His handwriting is careful but worn, a little crooked from years of fieldwork. He's the kind of man who dreams in straight lines and right angles. He glances at the glowing coals and says softly, almost to himself, "The water must never stop." It's not poetry, but it might as well be. You realize that in the Roman mind, water was not just a utility, it was civilization itself. A steady flow meant health, order, and the favor of the gods. A city without running water was a city without life. As you stretch out on the cool ground, listening to the night insects start their chorus, you picture the invisible water yet to come, flowing through arches, glinting in the sun, whispering against the stone. And for now, it's enough just to imagine it. Morning comes quietly. The mist still hugs the low hills, and the world smells faintly of wet grass and yesterday's dust. You stir from your thin blanket, stretch, and watch the horizon blush orange. The engineers are already awake, moving like sleepy ants, sharpening their tools, rolling up measuring ropes, and arguing softly about breakfast versus work. Today's task is to choose the source, the spring that will feed the entire aqueduct. Without the perfect water, all those careful lines and slopes from yesterday mean nothing. You pull on your sandals and join the group as they begin their slow march uphill toward the mountains where the water hides. The journey is quiet at first. You trudge over loose gravel, the crunch beneath your feet rhythmic and oddly soothing. Every now and then, someone points to a trickle of moisture running through the stones. Too small, too low, too muddy. The chief engineer, a wiry man named Lucius, shakes his head each time. He's looking for something better. Clear water, he mutters. High elevation, constant flow. You're guessing this is his mantra. A few miles later, the land rises into soft folds of green, dotted with cypress trees and the faint smell of thyme. The sound of running water finally reaches your ears, a distant, gurgling murmur, like someone whispering secrets into the rocks. The team slows, eyes brightening. When you reach the spring, it's smaller than you imagined, a narrow opening between stones, fringed with moss and tiny ferns. The water emerges crystal clear, cold enough to sting your fingertips when you touch it. You crouch and take a sip. It tastes of earth and rain, clean and alive. Lucius dips his bronze cup, examines it in the light. "This," he says softly, "is good." You'd think that's the end of the decision, but of course it isn't. Roman engineers were nothing if not thorough. They spend the next hour testing everything: the taste, the smell, the consistency. One assistant fills a shallow bowl and leaves it out in the sun to see if sediment gathers. Another measures the temperature with his hand, as if he can sense minerals by instinct. A mainstream historical fact slips into your thoughts here. The Romans were among the first to practice systematic water selection. They classified springs by taste and clarity, believing the purest waters came from upland sources running through limestone. Pliny the Elder even wrote that water from certain springs sparkled like silver, which he took as a sign of health. There's also something more practical at play. A spring higher than the city means the water can travel downhill by gravity, no pumps required. It's a silent, continuous miracle powered only by the shape of the land. Lucius explains that not all water is equal. Some springs carry a bitter tang of iron, others too much sulfur. A bad source could make the city sick. Historians still argue whether the Romans understood bacteria in the modern sense, but they certainly knew that clear, cold water meant healthier citizens and fewer funerals. You watch as one of the younger workers, barely more than a teenager, drops a leaf into the stream and follows it as it floats away down the slope. "It moves fast," he says. Lucius smiles faintly. "Then it will serve us well." The men begin measuring again, marking the flow's direction with small wooden pegs. They're not just picking the source, they're sketching the first stretch of the aqueduct's route. You trail behind them, brushing past tall grass and the occasional startled lizard. You pause at one point to take in the view. From this height, you can see the faint smudge of the city far below. Tiny roofs, faint smoke, the faint shimmer of life. It's humbling to realize that the water beneath your feet will soon quench the thirst of thousands of people, fill the great public baths, and bubble gently in marble fountains, all from this little crack in a rock. As you walk, you notice a small shrine nearby, a rough stone with offerings at its base, a few coins, a clay figurine, a sprig of rosemary. Lucius kneels, murmurs a brief prayer to the nymphs of the spring. You're told this is Fons, the Roman spirit of fresh water. Even the most practical engineers knew better than to anger the local deities. You wonder if this counts as insurance. A quirky tidbit here. Roman superstition dictated that before diverting a spring, builders sometimes dropped a live fish into the water. If it survived the journey down the channel, it was considered a good omen. It sounds bizarre, but honestly, who doesn't enjoy a little fish-based field test? By midday, the team rests under an olive tree. Bread, cheese, and olives again, the Roman engineers' version of trail mix. You lie back in the shade, listening to them debate how much of the spring's flow can be safely diverted without angering the local farmers. There's always someone who thinks the aqueduct will steal the rain. You suspect those arguments are eternal. Ancient Romans just didn't have social media to post them on. When the break ends, Lucius leads the group a bit downstream to check for stability. The source is perfect, he says, but the ground must hold. You watch as the men dig shallow test pits, feeling for firm soil and bedrock. They're careful not to disturb the spring itself, only the surrounding terrain. You crouch beside one of the workers who's scooping soil with a bronze shovel. If it's too soft, he explains, the channel will sink over time. If it's too hard, we'll have to cut through stone. Either way, there's no easy road ahead. Historians still argue whether Roman engineers used standardized testing methods or relied on instinct, but you can see they combined both. Their knowledge was equal parts experience and experimentation, a mix of math, superstition, and intuition passed down like family recipes. By afternoon, the spring has been officially chosen. Lucius carves a small symbol, a circle with two intersecting lines, into the stone beside it. From this, he says, Rome drinks. You can feel the pride in his voice. The team begins to map the route from here to the first collection basin, known as the Castellum Aquae. They'll need to follow the slope of the land carefully, ensuring a gentle, steady descent. One man stretches a rope downhill, while another calls out degrees of angle, his voice echoing through the valley. You trail behind, trying to imagine the invisible line of water that will one day flow here. Evening comes again, and the light turns golden. The spring glows like molten glass as it catches the last rays of the sun. You fill your hands with water and let it trickle through your fingers, imagining it centuries later, still flowing, still pure, still whispering the same song. As you walk back toward camp, you glance once more at the spring. It's so modest, so easily missed by anyone who doesn't know its power. The city below doesn't yet know it, but this little hillside trickle will one day feed its fountains, cool its temples, and echo in its baths. And tomorrow, you'll start charting the route it must take, one careful line after another, until the spring becomes an empire's lifeline. You take one last drink before heading downhill. The water is cold enough to make your teeth ache. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you wonder if the gods are listening, if they're pleased. Maybe they are. After all, you're helping bring their gift, water, to the world below. The sound of crickets rises as dusk falls, blending with the murmuring spring behind you. You close your eyes and let the sound fade into the night. The next morning greets you with the scent of pine and distant bread smoke from the city below. The spring you chose yesterday hums softly in the background, like a contented sigh from the hillside. Today's task feels less romantic and far more technical, mapping the route. The water may know where it wants to go, but the Romans refuse to leave it to chance. You, still rubbing sleep from your eyes, fall in line behind the team of surveyors as they begin the patient process of tracing the aqueduct's future journey across the land. The sun has barely climbed when Lucius, ever the perfectionist, plants his groma in the soil again. 4 plumb lines sway lazily in the morning breeze, perfectly balanced, marking a geometric cross. You watch him squint through the lines, adjust a peg, and mumble about degrees of descent that make your head spin. "A drop of 1 in 5,000, he mutters. "Any steeper, and the water will laugh at us." You're not sure what that means, but you nod wisely, as if you too have deep opinions about hydraulic gradients. Behind him, 2 assistants unfurl long ropes, knotted at regular intervals, Roman feet, not the modern kind. They stretch the ropes taut along the intended path, pulling until the fibers creak. Others follow, driving small wooden stakes into the soil where the line will run. You find it mesmerizing, a quiet, rhythmic dance of precision and patience. Every few paces, Lucius stops, looks through his groma, and calls out adjustments. 2 fingers left. No, your other left. Someone sighs dramatically, and a ripple of laughter spreads through the group. The Romans might be disciplined engineers, but even they can't resist a bit of morning sarcasm. The first stretch of mapping is gentle, rolling farmland dotted with olive groves and the occasional bleating goat. Farmers glance curiously from their fields, wondering why a group of sweaty men keeps arguing about invisible lines. A few even approach, asking if the aqueduct will cross their land. Lucius handles them diplomatically, explaining that Rome brings both water and glory. You suspect that only one of those things pays rent. You trail behind, occasionally stopping to take in the view. The city glimmers faintly in the distance, a mosaic of rooftops, smoke, and movement. Between here and there, the land dips and rises like waves frozen in stone. That's the real challenge, finding a route that allows the water to flow smoothly without needing endless bridges or tunnels. A mainstream historical fact hums in your mind. The Aqua Marcia, one of Rome's most famous aqueducts, stretched nearly 91 kilometers from its source in the Anio Valley to the city. Engineers spent years mapping and adjusting the line, ensuring that the gradient never exceeded a gentle slope of about 4,800. The result was so stable that parts of it still functioned centuries later. Lucius gestures for you to follow as the team descends a gentle valley. The morning mist clings to your tunic, and you can hear the faint buzz of bees in nearby wildflowers. The air is cool and smells faintly metallic, the promise of underground water veins. Occasionally, one of the men scribbles notes on a wax tablet, muttering about distances and elevation. It feels less like wandering through nature and more like watching an ancient GPS being invented. "Hold the rod steady," Lucius calls. One of the younger assistants freezes, gripping a tall sighting pole. "If you move it, the gods will smite you." You're not sure whether he's joking. Probably. Hopefully. The team stops for a brief rest at midday. You sit beneath a tree and watch them spread out their wax tablets, cross-checking numbers. The sun warms your back, and a breeze carries the smell of thyme and warm dust. Lucius chews a piece of bread thoughtfully and draws a quick sketch. A wavy line for hills, a dotted line for the aqueduct. It looks simple, but you know it hides hours of toil. Between bites, someone brings up a quirky tidbit that certain Roman engineers were rumored to borrow routes from old Etruscan water channels. Sometimes entire segments of new aqueducts followed paths laid centuries earlier by forgotten builders. It's half pragmatism, half plagiarism, and you can't help but admire the efficiency. Why reinvent the wheel when you can just slightly improve it and call it yours? After lunch, the team faces a challenge. A shallow ravine cutting directly across the intended route. You stand at the edge, looking down at the drop. It's not terribly deep, but it's long enough to be annoying. "We could curve around it," one assistant suggests. Lucius frowns. Curves waste distance. Water likes straight lines. They debate for a while, sketching alternatives in the dirt. Eventually, the decision is made. The aqueduct will cut across the ravine on a modest bridge of arches. You make a mental note. This will be one of many such crossings. The Romans loved a good arch, almost as much as they loved taxes. You follow them up the next hill, the air growing warmer and heavier. The rhythm of their work continues. Sight, measure, mark, correct, repeat. There's a soothing monotony to it, the kind that quiets your mind if you let it. Your sandals crunch in step with theirs. The ropes stretch out like ribbons, and for a while, time seems to soften around you. As you climb, Lucius points out landmarks. A cluster of oaks where the channel will bend. A stone outcrop that might serve as a future inspection point. A shallow depression that will one day hold a settling basin. The man sees the world not as it is, but as it will be. A network of water and stone. Historians still argue whether Roman engineers used a standardized map-making system or relied mostly on field sketches and memory. Judging by the mess of wax coblets and hand gestures around you, it was probably a mix of both. Somehow, though, it worked. Rome's aqueducts connected mountains, valleys, and cities with uncanny accuracy, long before the invention of compasses or digital maps. Late in the afternoon, the team reaches a ridge where the land opens wide before you. The city below glows golden in the setting sun, its temples and towers faintly visible. Lucius plants his grama again, peers through the strings, and nods with satisfaction. From here, he says, the water will see the city. It sounds almost poetic, though he probably means it literally. You stay there for a moment, letting the view soak in. The marked route now stretches behind you, miles of pegs and stakes threading through the landscape, faint but certain. It feels like following the shadow of something that doesn't exist yet, but soon will. A farmer passes by with a cart of figs and pauses to watch the team. "Another one?" he asks, half amused. "You Romans in your water." Lucius just smiles. "You'll thank us when you're bathing twice a day." The farmer snorts. "I'll thank you when you stop walking through my field." By the time you make it back to camp, the sky has turned a dusky purple. The men drop their tools and collapse beside the fire, laughing about near misses and misaligned poles. Someone passes around a jug of watered wine, not exactly fine vintage, but after a day like this, it tastes divine. Lucius sits a little apart, reviewing his notes by firelight. You catch a glimpse of his sketches, lines, slopes, angles, all converging toward the city. He doesn't look tired. If anything, he looks content. "The land," he murmurs, "has given us permission." You lie back, watching sparks drift into the night. The hum of crickets fills the silence, and you can almost trace the invisible route in your mind, from spring to ridge to city, like a silver thread waiting for water. Tomorrow, you'll start turning that thread into something tangible. The stakes and the dirt will give way to trenches, and soon stone will follow. But for now, under the Roman stars, it's enough just to imagine the flow beginning. The next morning dawns pale and golden, the kind of light that makes everything seem both new and ancient at once. You wake to the creak of wooden wagons and the scrape of shovels being dragged from the tool tent. The ground is dry beneath your blanket, and the air carries the cool tang of stone dust. Today, you'll set out the line, the invisible thread that will soon become Rome's next great aqueduct. Lucius is already up, predictably. He's standing on a low ridge with his grama planted before him like a flag. You can tell by his posture that he's been awake for hours, rehearsing the measurements in his mind. He catches your eye, raises a hand, and calls, "Time to turn dreams into straight lines." You trudge up to join him, rubbing sleep from your eyes, and the first thing you notice is how alive the valley looks in the morning sun. The rows of stakes from yesterday's mapping glint faintly with dew. They look almost decorative, like a garland draped across the land. But this garland, you remind yourself, will one day carry a river. The men assemble behind Lucius, carrying ropes, poles, and tablets. The groma is repositioned, its 4 plumb lines swaying gently in the breeze. Today's task is all about precision. No digging yet, no grand gestures, just patient alignment. The surveyors will walk the full length of the planned route, staking the final line that the builders will soon follow with chisels and sweat. Lucius kneels beside his assistant, who unrolls a tightly wound rope. The rope is oiled to prevent fraying, and tiny knots mark every Roman foot. "We trust rope more than rulers," he explains with a half smile. "Rulers warp, rope remembers." You nod, mostly because it sounds philosophical. They begin to move. One man holds the rope taut while another sights down the line using the groma's arms. Lucius mutters corrections. "A finger left. No, too far. Back half a thumb." It's painstaking work, but the rhythm soon becomes hypnotic. Stretch, align, stake, confirm. A breeze rises, and one of the plumb lines starts to sway. Lucius sighs, mutters something unprintable in Latin, and waits for it to still. "Wind," he grumbles, "the eternal enemy of straight lines." You can't resist. Maybe the gods prefer curves. He chuckles softly. Then they can build their own aqueduct. The team reaches a point where the ground begins to dip. Here, the slope must be measured even more carefully. Too steep, and the water will rush too fast, eroding the channel. Too shallow, and it will stagnate and turn foul. A mainstream historical fact floats to mind. Most Roman aqueducts were built with an average gradient of just 1 part in 2,000, about half a meter drop per kilometer. A margin that fine, you realize, meant a single misplaced stake could ruin miles of work. Lucius pulls out the corybates, that long wooden level with a carved water trough you've seen before. He sets it on the ground, fills the trough, and crouches to check the water's surface. The reflection shimmers faintly in the sunlight, perfectly still. "Level," he says, satisfied. One of the younger surveyors, eager to impress, asks whether they could use the stars for alignment instead. Lucius raises an eyebrow. "If you can make the water flow uphill with starlight, by all means, try." The group laughs, and the tension eases. You follow them further down the slope, the line of stakes now stretching for hundreds of meters behind you. Each stake bears a small mark, a Roman numeral indicating distance from the source. They'll serve as guideposts once digging begins. It's surprisingly elegant, this language of sticks and numbers, geometry made visible. At one point, Lucius calls for a halt. Ahead lies a stubborn outcrop of limestone jutting across the route. The men gather around, peering at it like doctors examining a difficult patient. "We could go around," one suggests. Lucius shakes his head. "No, the water deserves the straight path." His tone is reverent, almost devotional. "They mark the rock's width, height, and depth. It'll need to be chiseled through later. Not a problem for Roman masons who treated solid stone like butter given enough time. You can almost hear the future echoes of hammers already." As the team continues, you notice how the land itself seems to adapt to their purpose. The line weaves gently through fields, dips into shallow gullies, and skirts clusters of trees. Birds flutter overhead, indifferent to the human geometry below. Somewhere in the distance, a farmer's plow squeaks, a reminder that daily life continues even as the foundations of infrastructure are laid. There's a quirky tidbit that comes to mind. Roman engineers were said to have a superstition about right angles. When plotting turns in an aqueduct, they'd sometimes pour a little wine on the ground first, offering it to the spirits of symmetry. Lucius doesn't seem the superstitious type, but later, when the line takes a sharp bend around a cluster of boulders, you swear you see him pour a drop from his flask, just in case. By midday, the sun blazes overhead. The air hums with heat and flies. The surveyors break for rest beneath an olive tree, wiping sweat from their brows. You collapse beside them, grateful for the shade. Someone passes around dates and salted nuts. The taste is simple but satisfying. Lucius sits nearby, drawing on his wax tablet. His sketch shows the route as a series of gentle slopes, annotated with notes about soil quality and landmarks. He looks up when he catches you watching. "Every aqueduct begins as a dream," he says, "but the earth decides how it ends." You're not sure if that's wisdom or fatigue talking, but either way, it sticks in your head. After lunch, work resumes. The line grows longer, more defined. Occasionally, a stake has to be adjusted when the ground shifts or the rope stretches. The team works with quiet concentration, broken only by the clack of tools and the distant cry of a hawk overhead. As the sun starts to dip, Lucius orders one final check of the day's alignment. The men walk the length of the newly staked route, double-checking distances. It's nearly perfect. The stakes line up like pearls on a string. A few tiny corrections are made, a stake nudged an inch to the left, a number rescribed more neatly. Historians still argue whether ancient Roman surveyors could truly maintain such precision across long distances. Some claim they used hidden sighting pits and water-filled trenches to preserve the gradient. Others believe sheer experience and endless verification did the trick. Watching Lucius and his crew, you're inclined to believe the latter. They might not have lasers or satellites, but they have patience, and that might be better. Evening falls by the time you return to camp. The stakes now form a continuous path stretching toward the horizon, a thread of order stitched through the wild landscape. You glance back one last time. It's subtle, almost invisible from a distance, but you can feel the quiet power of it. The line exists now, not just in drawings, but in the bones of the earth. The men settle around the fire again, their laughter easy, their fatigue well-earned. Lucius takes a slow sip from his cup, gazing out over the darkening hills. "Tomorrow," he says, "we dig." You stretch out beside the fire, the smell of smoke and pine sap mingling in the cool air. The stars begin to show, scattered across the sky like distant campfires of their own. The thought drifts lazily through your tired mind. Every great thing, even something as monumental as a Roman aqueduct, begins with a single straight line in the dirt. And tonight, that line feels like the first heartbeat of something vast and living. The morning of the first dig begins with an almost sacred stillness. The air feels different, charged with quiet expectation. Even the birds seem hesitant to sing, as though the valley itself is holding its breath. You wake before dawn this time, stirred by the low murmur of voices and the faint clink of metal against stone. When you step out of your tent, a soft mist hugs the ground, curling around the stakes that now mark the aqueduct's path like ghosts of future arches. Lucius stands near the edge of the work site, already in motion, barking calm but firm instructions. Around him, dozens of workers, masons, diggers, slaves, and apprentices move like parts of a well-practiced machine. Some are sharpening chisels, others are carrying wooden shovels and baskets woven from reeds. The smell of oil, dust, and sweat blends with the faint aroma of spiced porridge being ladled into bowls. When Lucius spots you, he gives a brief nod. Today, he says, the earth begins to remember our intentions. His words sound ceremonial, almost priestly. You realize this isn't just engineering, it's ritual, art, and belief intertwined. The first shovelful of soil is always symbolic. Lucius takes it himself, pressing the blade into the ground with deliberate care. He lifts the dirt, dark and damp, and places it aside. A few of the men cheer quietly, others bow their heads. Then, with a single command, ad opus, the valley erupts into motion. Dozens of shovels bite into the earth. The sound is rhythmic, almost musical. Scrape, lift, thud. Dust rises in faint golden clouds that shimmer in the morning sun. The line you spent days perfecting now begins to take form as a shallow trench. You can see it extending farther and farther, a ribbon of labor unspooling across the land. The men work in teams of 4 or 5. One digs, another lifts the loosened soil, a third carries it away in a basket to dump it downwind. The older workers move with unhurried precision, conserving energy, while the younger ones attack the ground with raw enthusiasm. You overhear jokes traded between them, mostly about whose trench will be straightest or who will hit rock first. A group of slaves sing a slow, steady tune as they dig, a wordless chant that keeps rhythm with the shovels. The melody is haunting, but strangely soothing, a heartbeat beneath the clamor. One of the overseers, a burly man named Marcus, keeps time by tapping a rod against his knee. He's firm but fair, reminding everyone to drink water often. The sun is cruel, he says, but it respects persistence. As the trench deepens, Lucius moves along the line, checking slope and depth with the chorobates. Every few paces, he adjusts a worker's mark or mutters a note to his scribe. You follow him, fascinated by his focus. His eyes dart constantly between the instrument, the trench, and the stakes, measuring not just the land, but the invisible flow of future water. Around mid-morning, the first problem arises. A patch of stubborn rock, the same outcrop identified earlier, halts one of the teams. Hammers and chisels ring out, sharp and metallic. Chips of stone scatter into the air. The work slows, and Lucius frowns. "We expected this," he says, crouching beside the obstacle. "Limestone, soft enough, but layered." He signals for the delabre, those heavy pickaxes designed for both cutting and prying. The masons take over, their blows deliberate, almost sculptural. You watch as they carve a clean face into the rock, exposing veins of pale gray and chalky white. The smell of crushed mineral fills the air. To pass the time, Lucius tells you how some aqueduct builders used fire and vinegar to fracture tough stone. They'd heat it with burning wood, then douse it suddenly, shocking the rock into cracking. Ingenious, he muses, and very Roman, always patient but never gentle. By noon, the trench has advanced several hundred meters. The line looks rough now, uneven, more suggestion than structure, but it's undeniably a beginning. Workers rest in the shade, gulping water from leather flasks. Bread and olives are passed around, followed by a few bites of salted pork. You sit with them, watching heat shimmer over the valley floor. Nearby, 2 men debate in low voices about whether Rome truly needs another aqueduct. "We already have 9, one says, wiping his brow. "How much water can one city drink?" The other shrugs. As long as there are emperors, there will be fountains. They both laugh, but there's a quiet truth in it. After lunch, the work shifts to shaping the trench walls. Using small hand tools, the masons smooth the edges, ensuring consistent width. The specus, or channel, must be exact, not just for strength, but for the slow, graceful movement of water. Lucius inspects each section like a sculptor judging his marble. He reminds everyone, a single misstep here and Rome drinks mud. By mid-afternoon, the soundscape changes again. From the northern end, teams begin hauling in opus caementitium, Roman concrete, mixed on site from lime, sand, and crushed volcanic stone. The mixture steams faintly in the sun. Workers pour it into wooden molds lining the trench, forming the channel bed. Others press tegulae, roof tiles, against the sides to reinforce the edges. Lucius explains that the concrete will cure stronger with each passing day, a kind of slow alchemy. This, he says, is why our works outlive us. He dips a finger into the wet mix and draws a short line on his wrist like a mark of devotion. You notice others do the same, a small, unspoken ritual of belonging. As evening approaches, shadows stretch long over the half-dug trench. The workers are exhausted, their backs bent, their tunics stained with earth and lime. Yet there's an unmistakable pride in their faces. The day's work is visible, tangible, and in it lies both toil and triumph. You walk the length of the new trench, watching as the last shovels fall silent. The line glows faintly in the amber light, a scar of progress etched into the hillside. The smell of wet earth and mortar lingers, mingling with the distant smoke of evening fires. Lucius joins you, silent at first. He stands with his arms crossed, eyes fixed on the path ahead. "When this is finished," he says softly, "a man in Rome will drink from a fountain and never think of this place. He will never know the faces, the sweat, or the stones that carried his water. But that's as it should be." You glance at him. "You don't mind that they'll forget?" He smiles faintly. "The water will remember." It's nearly dark when the final horn sounds, signaling the end of the workday. Tools are gathered, ropes coiled, fires kindled. Laughter drifts through the camp as the men settle in, trading stories about past projects, the aqueducts of Nimes, of Segovia, of Carthage. Some tales are clearly exaggerated, but the pride is real. Someone begins to play a reed flute. The tune is gentle, meandering, perfectly suited to the hour. You lie back on the ground, watching sparks rise into the deepening blue sky. Your muscles ache from the long day, but the sound of the flute and the slow crackle of the fire soothe you. The night deepens. A faint breeze carries the scent of lime and pine. You think of how each day will build upon this one. The trench deepening, the arches rising, the stones laid with care until the valley itself becomes a conduit of motion and sound. And then, one day, long after these men are gone, water will run through this channel, clear, cold, tireless, flowing silently toward a city that will never sleep, never thirst. For now, though, the valley rests. The moon climbs higher, silvering the stakes and tools below. Somewhere, an owl calls, and the faint echo drifts across the half-made aqueduct. You close your eyes, letting the rhythm of the day fade into dream, a dream of endless flow, of work that outlives its makers. Because tonight, beneath the Roman stars, the first breath of the aqueduct has begun. The next morning dawns bright and dry, the kind of day that feels almost designed for hard labor. The sky stretches clear and pale over the valley, and the sound of shovels has already begun before you even open your eyes. You sit up, rubbing the grit from your face, and smell something strange in the air, something sharp, like smoke mixed with seawater. It takes you a moment to realize what it is: lime. Today, the aqueduct begins to take on its true Roman character. The digging was just the first act. Now comes the magic material that will hold it all together: opus caementitium, Roman concrete. You've seen it before in crumbling ruins back home. in walls that somehow still stand centuries after everything else has fallen. But now you'll see it made fresh, steaming and alive, just as the ancients did. Lucius is already at the center of the camp, sleeves rolled up, supervising a circle of workers mixing the first batches. "Careful with the ratio," he calls, his voice echoing off the nearby cliffs. "Too much lime and it cracks, too little and it crumbles." Around him, large wooden troughs have been set up, each filled with a combination of crushed stone, volcanic ash, and slaked lime. You approach cautiously, feeling the heat that rises from the mixture. "It's alive," Lucius says with a grin, reading your expression. "In a way, the lime eats the water, and in return, it hardens the world." He gestures for you to help. You grab a wooden paddle and begin stirring, feeling the resistance of the thick, grainy substance. It smells faintly metallic, and a fine white dust coats your arms almost instantly. "Careful," Lucius warns. "Don't breathe too much of it in. Roman engineers are clever, not immortal." A few men nearby are heating water over a small fire, feeding more to the mixture as needed. Others are grinding volcanic rock, pozzolana, Lucius explains, imported all the way from the Bay of Naples. "That's the real secret," he says, "the ash of Vesuvius. It makes the concrete set even underwater." You can't help but marvel. Even in your time, people still study this stuff, trying to decode its chemistry. Historians still argue whether the Romans understood the molecular reactions or if they just stumbled on it by accident. Either way, it worked. The aqueducts of Rome have stood for nearly 2 millennia, while some modern structures barely last a century. As the workers stir and pour, the mixture begins to change color, from gray to pale ivory, then slowly to a dull, stony white. Lucius tests it with his hands, pressing it into a wooden frame. "Good," he says. "This will last longer than any of us." Across the trench, another team prepares molds, wooden planks carefully fitted together, creating a long rectangular channel. When the concrete is ready, they'll pour it in and tamp it smooth, forming the base of the water conduit. But before they begin, the masons add a lining of small stones and broken tiles. It gives the mix something to grip, one explains, like bones under skin. The day wears on, and you move between teams, watching the process unfold like a slow dance. The lime pit bubbles faintly as new batches are mixed. The volcanic dust floats in sunlight, giving the air a hazy glow. The smell of wet stone fills your lungs, oddly soothing. During a break, a younger worker offers you a drink of watered wine. He grins and says, "You should see the stuff they used before concrete, just mortar and hope." You laugh, nearly spilling your cup. He tells you a story, perhaps an exaggeration, about a small aqueduct near Tiber that collapsed because someone forgot to check the slope. Whole thing backed up, he says, and flooded the governor's vineyard. Worst harvest in living memory. There's laughter around the circle, but beneath it, you sense a quiet pride. These men know they're part of something that won't fail. They're not just mixing mud, they're creating permanence. By midday, the first section of the concrete bed is ready. The teams carry heavy wooden buckets filled with the thick mixture and pour it carefully into the mold. It spreads slowly, thick as honey, steaming faintly in the heat. Masons with flat wooden paddles smooth it out, striking it rhythmically. Thump, drag, scrape. You find yourself mesmerized by the repetition. Lucius crouches beside one of the molds, tracing a finger through the wet surface. "Every inch must be even," he says softly. "The water must glide, never rush. The slope, 1 finger's width every 100 paces." He looks up at you. Water is obedient, but only to precision. There's something poetic in that, and you file it away for later, maybe as a line to open a lecture or lull a future listener to sleep. As the afternoon progresses, the heat intensifies. Workers cover their heads with cloth, their tunics soaked in sweat. Buckets clatter, water splashes, voices rise in rhythmic shouts. It's a kind of music now, not chaotic, but deliberate, as if the entire site is breathing in unison. Lucius calls you over again, this time to a side experiment. "Watch this," he says. He places a small amount of fresh lime into a clay bowl and adds a splash of water. Within seconds, it fizzes violently, releasing a burst of steam. "That," he says with satisfaction, "is the Roman sun in a bowl. You wouldn't believe how many times it's burned a careless hand." He pauses, then adds quietly, "Historians still argue whether the volcanic ash was a gift from the gods or just a lucky accident. Personally, I think the gods help those who pay attention." By late afternoon, the molds are full. The surface gleams under the waning sunlight, smooth as glass. Workers mark each completed section with a small carved stone showing their legion's symbol. Not vanity, but record-keeping. If a section ever failed, the mark would tell who built it. Accountability baked into concrete. While the surface begins to set, Lucius leads you to a nearby tent filled with samples. Chunks of hardened concrete, fragments of previous projects. He picks one up and hands it to you. It's rough but solid, surprisingly light. "This," he says, "is what Rome is built on. Not marble, not gold. Lime, ash, and patience." He laughs softly. "You know, the Senate once tried to cut the budget for pozzolana imports. The engineers revolted, politely of course, and the idea was dropped. Even politicians know not to anger the men who keep the baths flowing." As evening draws near, the valley quiets. The smell of wet lime lingers, and the new channels gleam faintly in the fading light. You walk beside them, fingertips brushing the smooth surface. It's warm still, pulsing faintly like living skin. Tomorrow, it will be cold and unyielding, a foundation for centuries of water. You think about the paradox of it all, something so solid born from dust, fire, and water. The Romans didn't just build with materials, they built with chemistry, patience, and audacity. At supper, the conversation drifts to legends of other great works, the Cloaca Maxima, still draining Rome after half a millennium, and the Pantheon's dome, whose concrete seems lighter the higher it rises. One old mason claims it's because the gods breathed through it. Another insists it's because they mixed in pumice, volcanic foam. Both sound right in their own way. When the night deepens, you return to the curing channel. A faint mist rises from the surface, catching the moonlight. You crouch, tracing the faint warmth still lingering within. Somewhere in the distance, water gurgles in a stream, the source waiting patiently for its turn. Lucius joins you, his voice low. "Tomorrow, we'll build the walls of the channel. Once the concrete sets, it will hold water for centuries." You nod, unable to look away from the soft glow of lime in the moonlight. "It's strange," you say, "to think this will outlive everyone here." "That's the point, my friend. The empire may crumble, emperors may fade, but the water will still find its way home." The night wind rustles the olive trees, carrying with it the scent of lime, ash, and earth, the perfume of permanence. You close your eyes, listening to the faint hum of settling stone, the quiet breathing of the valley, and the whisper of history being born molecule by molecule. When dawn breaks, the air feels cooler than usual, calm and heavy with the scent of drying lime and damp stone. You wake to the quiet murmur of men stretching their backs and tying on their sandals, a routine that has already settled into rhythm. The valley hums softly with purpose, like a living thing preparing for another day of slow transformation. The concrete beds poured yesterday have begun to harden overnight. When you touch one, it's cool now, the warmth of its curing gone, replaced by a dense solidity that feels ancient even in its youth. Lucius inspects each section, tapping lightly with the back of his hammer. "Perfect," he mutters, "it sings properly." You tilt your head, half expecting the stone to hum. Today's work is more delicate, shaping the specus, the inner channel that will carry the water itself. You can picture it already, a long, smooth corridor of stone and mortar, just wide enough for a man to walk through, stretching endlessly toward Rome. The teams have been divided again. masons for the lining, tile workers for the finishing, and a handful of young apprentices tasked with mixing fresh mortar. As you walk alongside the trench, the men are already at it. The masons are spreading fresh mortar, a lighter mix than yesterday's, along the walls of the channel. They move with slow precision, smoothing each layer with curved wooden tools until it gleams faintly in the morning light. You want the inside as smooth as marble, Lucius says, so the water glides. No snags, no turbulence. The gods dislike splashing. You notice the masons etching small symbols into the still soft mortar. Not decorations exactly, but marks. Initials, tiny shapes, sometimes a crude fish or an eye. Lucius catches you staring and shrugs. Every craftsman leaves something of himself behind, he says. When the aqueduct carries water centuries from now, those marks will still be here, hidden but not gone. You crouch and trace one with your finger, a spiral set deep into the mortar. It feels oddly intimate, like a secret handshake across time. A few paces away, two tile workers are heating bricks over a small fire. These are the tegulae, flat terracotta tiles that will line parts of the channel. When the mortar is ready, they'll press them carefully against the sides, overlapping like fish scales. The combination of tile and concrete is what makes the Roman system so durable. The tile resists erosion, while the concrete absorbs shock and weight. You help one of the men hand up a stack of tiles. They're rough-edged and warm from the fire, smelling faintly of clay and smoke. This one, the worker says, tapping a tile with his thumb, came from a kiln near Capua. Good clay there, doesn't crack when it freezes. He leans closer, lowering his voice as though confessing a secret. They say some tiles have fingerprints still burned into them, from slaves or children who carried them to the fire too soon. He shakes his head, a flicker of guilt passing through his eyes. The gods remember such touches, even if the world forgets. The work continues steadily through the morning. The walls of the channel rise brick by brick, each section carefully smoothed and sealed. Lucius moves among the teams, checking levels with a simple sighting rod, ensuring the slope remains steady. 1 part in 300, he reminds you. That's the secret. Too steep and the water rushes. Too shallow and it stagnates. He smiles faintly. Historians still argue whether we use the chorobots for every section or just the tricky parts. But I say, when you're building for eternity, measure twice, curse once. By midday, the sun beats down hard on the worksite. The smell of drying mortar fills the air, sharp and chalky. The soundscape has shifted from the rhythmic thud of digging to the scraping of trowels and the faint crackle of fires heating tiles. You walk inside one of the partially finished channels, the air cooler and damp. The walls are smooth and slightly curved, the light filtering through temporary wooden frames above. It feels like stepping into the veins of the earth, narrow, quiet, and faintly echoing. You can already imagine water flowing here, dark, steady, whispering past the stone like breath through a flute. One mason beside you hums softly as he works. You ask him what tune it is. He grins without pausing. Something my grandmother sang. She said it keeps the mortar from cracking. You can't tell if he's joking. Later in the afternoon, Lucius gathers a few workers for a small test. We'll see how the channel holds, he says, motioning toward a completed section. Buckets of water are poured in, slowly filling the trough. Everyone watches as it trickles forward. The flow is steady, graceful. A few drops leak through one joint, and Lucius frowns. Mark it, he says. We'll seal it with crushed brick dust later. You watch the sunlight dance across the thin stream, the reflection flickering against the curved walls. It's mesmerizing, like watching the future take its first breath. When you emerge from the channel, you notice a group of laborers painting a reddish substance along the inside of another section. Curious, you ask Lucius what it is. A mix of crushed tile, lime, and oil, he explains. We call it opus cyaninum. Makes the surface waterproof. Some say it even smells pleasant when the water warms it. You lean closer. It does, a faint, earthy fragrance, like wet clay after rain. You wonder if, centuries later, someone restoring the ruins might catch the same scent and briefly feel connected to this exact moment. As the sun begins to dip, Lucius decides to inspect the entire length of the day's progress. You follow, the two of you walking slowly beside the forming aqueduct. He points out the small inspection hatches being built every few hundred meters, little stone boxes with removable lids, so that future engineers can climb in to clean or repair the flow. Maintenance is the true art, he says. Anyone can build once, only the wise build for upkeep. You chuckle. Spoken like someone who doesn't want their work blamed in 500 years. Lucius laughs. Exactly. By early evening, the day's work is done. The new section of the channel stretches ahead like a pale ribbon, shimmering in the sunset. Workers rinse their tools in the nearby stream, the sound of water mingling with distant laughter. Someone starts a fire for the evening meal, and the air fills with the smell of bread, garlic, and roasted lentils. You sit beside the trench, feet dangling above the hardened channel, feeling the faint vibration of settling stone beneath you. The work has a rhythm now. Dig, pour, line, seal. Each day layering purpose over effort. As the stars appear, Lucius joins you again, carrying a small clay cup of watered wine. Do you know, he says quietly, some say the gods of water travel with the flow, that every aqueduct is a kind of road for spirits. You raise an eyebrow. You believe that? He takes a slow sip before answering. I believe the world remembers what moves through it. Stones, water, footsteps, they all leave traces. The Romans just learned how to listen. The night deepens, the sound of the camp fading to soft murmurs. You stretch out on the grass beside the half-built aqueduct, tracing the faint line of the Milky Way overhead, another flowing river, this one made of stars. You think about all the channels humanity has ever carved, from rivers to roads to stories like this one, each meant to carry something vital, water, ideas, dreams. The aqueduct gleams faintly in the moonlight, its inner surface drying smooth and strong. Somewhere down the line, a worker hums the same old tune about keeping mortar from cracking, his voice carrying softly on the breeze. You close your eyes and imagine the first rush of water filling this space, cool and eternal, whispering against the tile as it journeys toward Rome. It's hard not to feel small here, under this sky, beside this quiet labor. But maybe that's the point. Every stone laid, every tile pressed, every groove smoothed is part of something that will outlast its makers, something vast, invisible, and alive. You listen to the night and the faint creak of settling mortar, a lullaby of stone and time, and drift toward sleep with the faint taste of lime dust on your lips. The morning begins with a low rumble that makes the valley tremble ever so slightly. Not thunder, but the sound of wooden scaffolding being hoisted upright. The aqueduct has reached a new phase now, one that trades the comfort of earth for the dizzying open air. You rub your eyes and step outside your tent to find the once flat worksite suddenly bristling with timber frames, ladders, and ropes. The horizon looks like a forest of skeletons reaching toward the sky. Today, you'll see the arches rise. Lucius greets you near the first foundation pier, his hair already powdered with stone dust. Up we go, he says cheerfully, as if scaling a wooden tower before breakfast were a perfectly reasonable thing to do. Behind him, carpenters are busy fitting huge beams together with pegs and rope. No nails, just precision and trust. The scaffolds creak underfoot as you climb. Below, the men look like ants, each carrying baskets of cut stone to the masons above. The air is full of rhythmic noise, hammers tapping wedges, pulleys squealing, men shouting measurements. The smell of pine resin from the scaffolding mixes with lime dust, making every breath taste faintly of earth and sap. Lucius gestures toward the rising piers. Each arch begins with two foundations, sunk deep and true, he explains. Without them, Everything else dances, and not the graceful kind. He laughs quietly, brushing dust from his hands. We learned that the hard way in Hispania. You lean over the edge, perhaps a little too far, to watch workers below setting the next course of stones. Each block, freshly cut and damp, is carefully positioned using wooden cranes called tolene. 2 men crank the ropes, another steadies the load, and a fourth shouts, "Hold!" at the exact moment the block swings into place. The precision is mesmerizing. The masons work as if guided by instinct, tapping each stone into its bed of lime mortar until the seam disappears. You notice that the stones are slightly wedge-shaped, thicker at the bottom, narrower at the top. For the arch, Lucius says, catching your gaze, each one will lean on its neighbor. Alone, they fall. Together, they stand forever. That phrase lingers in your mind. Alone, they fall. Together, they stand. You can't help thinking the same might apply to the empire itself. By mid-morning, the first arch begins to take shape. Wooden centering frames, curved ribs of timber, span the gap between piers, supporting the stones until the keystone locks everything in place. Carpenters move deftly along the scaffolds, tightening ropes, adjusting wedges, checking angles with weighted plumb lines. One young apprentice, balancing precariously on a beam, looks down and mutters, "If I fall, tell my mother I was measuring correctly." Someone below shouts back, "You probably weren't." The laughter that follows cuts through the tension for a moment, reminding everyone that fear and humor share the same narrow space. Lucius joins you on the upper platform, studying the growing arch with quiet intensity. "The secret," he says, "is patience. Rush an arch and it collapses. But once it's locked, even earthquakes bow to it." You nod, thinking of the ruins you've seen, those endless rows of arches still standing after centuries. The Romans truly built with eternity in mind. A group of slaves approaches, hauling the next batch of stones, heavy limestone blocks quarried miles away. You watch as they move in perfect unison, sweat gleaming on their backs, the sun catching on bronze chains and tools. It's brutal work, yet there's something strangely reverent about their discipline. One man mutters a short prayer before lifting. You can't catch the words, but you think you recognize the rhythm, not Latin, but something older. The day grows hotter, and the lime dust clings to your skin like a second layer. The workers drink from goatskin flasks passed down the line. You take a sip when one is offered. Warm, mineral-rich water from a nearby spring. "Not from the aqueduct yet," someone jokes. "That's for the fancy people in Rome." By noon, the first arch is nearly complete. Only the keystone remains, the single wedge-shaped stone that will make or break everything. Lucius watches as the block is hauled upward, dangling in the sun like a pale tooth. Every sound seems to pause, the chatter, the hammering, even the wind. The crane creaks as the keystone is lowered slowly, slowly into place. When it finally settles, the fit is perfect. Lucius raises one hand, and the men below cheer. The arch holds its breath, then exhales. The centering frame beneath it bears the weight for a moment longer, then is carefully released. Nothing moves. The arch stands free. You can feel the quiet pride ripple through the crowd like a pulse. The first of many has been born. Lucius turns to you, his voice low but firm. Now we repeat it, 200 times if needed. Every valley crossed, every gap spanned. The aqueduct must never break its line. You descend from the scaffold, legs shaky but spirit high. On the ground, you walk beneath the new arch, craning your neck to see the sunlight filtering through. The space feels different now, heavier, purposeful, as if the air itself knows it's part of something lasting. Nearby, a group of engineers debates the spacing of future arches. One argues that closer supports will resist earthquakes. Another insists that wider spans save stone and labor. Historians still argue about that, Lucius mutters under his breath. They'll keep arguing long after the stones are dust. As afternoon wears on, more arches begin to rise. The landscape transforms before your eyes. No longer a valley, but a procession of geometry and grace. The air is full of movement, cranes turning, ropes creaking, the rhythmic clang of chisels against stone. Each arch mirrors the last, forming a steady rhythm across the sky. You spend the rest of the day helping where you can, carrying mortar, adjusting ropes, brushing dust from finished joints. The sun blazes overhead, but a soft breeze flows through the open frames, whispering across the stones like encouragement. One point, Lucius tells you an odd story, half legend, half warning. They say that on one aqueduct near Tarraco, an engineer built an arch too narrow. When the keystone wouldn't fit, he tried to shave it down while it hung above him. The stone fell, missed him by inches, and landed perfectly in place. He took credit for divine intervention. Lucius grins. I call it dumb luck. By dusk, 5 arches now stand in a neat row, glowing gold in the setting sun. Their shadows stretch long across the valley floor, parallel lines of history waiting to happen. The scaffolding creaks in the cooling air, ropes slackening as the day winds down. You sit with Lucius and a few workers on a low wall, watching the light fade. The arches tower above you, simple shapes, yet somehow transcendent. Do you ever get used to it? You ask quietly, seeing something rise like that? Lucius shakes his head. Never. Every arch is a heartbeat. Together, they make the empire breathe. The men around you nod, sipping from shared cups of wine. The laughter is softer now, the exhaustion deep but content. Somewhere, someone starts humming a tune you've heard before, the same low work song that's followed the project since the trenches began. When night falls, the arches glow silver under the moon, their reflections faintly rippling in the stream below. You lie on your back, staring up at their perfect curves, feeling the faint tremor of wind through the stone. It's strange to think that water, something so soft, so fleeting, will one day travel across these massive bones of stone. But perhaps that's the balance the Romans understood better than anyone. Permanence built to serve motion. You close your eyes, and in your mind, the arches stretch endlessly toward the horizon, carrying not just water, but time itself. The arches now march confidently across the valley like a stone army. But the road ahead only grows more complicated. Hills rise, rivers twist, and deep ravines cut through the landscape like careless knife marks. You wake early, rubbing the grit from your eyes, and find Lucius already at his Mac table, tracing the route of the aqueduct with his stylus. The line he draws looks simple enough, just a smooth curve sweeping across the parchment, but the world outside is anything but simple. He gestures for you to come closer. We've conquered the air, he says, meaning the arches. Now we must master the land beneath it. The next stretch of the aqueduct crosses a wide valley with a sluggish river winding through its center. The engineers gather around, arguing quietly, their words mixing with the croak of frogs and the rush of wind through tall reeds. You catch phrases like gradient, pressure head, and siphon chamber. The tone is serious. This is where theory meets reality. Lucius kneels, drawing in the dirt with a stick. We could build more arches, he says, sketching a row of tiny half-moons across the valley. But it would take a year and bankrupt us in timber alone. He wipes the drawing away and replaces it with a series of dots and a downward curve. Or we could let the water descend here, then rise again on the other side. You frown. Down and up? He nods. Exactly, through pipes, a reverse siphon. The Greeks did it first, we only improved it. It sounds simple, but the execution is anything but. To make water dip and rise again without breaking flow, the Romans used sealed lead pipes, thick and heavy, laid deep into the ground. The pressure had to be perfect. Too steep a descent and the pipe would burst. Too gentle and the water would stagnate. Historians still argue whether the engineers calculated this purely by instinct or if they understood something akin to hydraulic physics. Lucius, for his part, claims it's both. A little math, a lot of praying. You follow the team down into the valley, where surveyors are already driving stakes into the soft earth. Wooden frames outline where the siphon chambers will go, massive stone tanks that will guide the water down, then up again. The ground squelches beneath your sandals as you walk, and you find yourself thinking that building in the air was easier. The first task is to divert the stream temporarily, which means more digging. Laborers swing picks into the riverbank, redirecting the flow into a makeshift channel lined with planks and mud. The real work begins when the bed is dry. Teams haul in enormous lead pipes, each one cast in sections, their edges hammered tight with molten solder. The smell of hot metal fills the air, sharp and metallic, almost like lightning trapped in solid form. You help guide one section into place, your hands slipping against its smooth gray surface. It's heavier than it looks, and you quickly learn to keep your toes out of the way. Careful, a worker warns, lead bites worse than a snake. You can't tell if he's joking, but you keep your distance just in case. As the pipe network snakes through the valley, you start to appreciate the Roman obsession with gradients. Every few paces, Lucius crouches down with his leveling tool, a simple but brilliant contraption of wood, water, and string to make sure the slope stays consistent. Too much pride ruins an aqueduct, he mutters, and too little slope ruins the water. By midday, the sun beats mercilessly on your neck, and the lead pipes gleam like molten silver. Workers move more slowly now, their shoulders shining with sweat. The rhythmic clang of hammers on metal echoes through the valley like a blacksmith's heartbeat. Somewhere nearby, someone hums a half-remembered tune about Neptune, god of the waters, who's probably watching all this with mixed amusement. Lucius joins you for a drink under the shade of a temporary shelter. You know, he says between sips, some scholars claim the water in these pipes picks up lead and poisons whoever drinks it. You raise an eyebrow. Do you believe that? He grins. If it kills me, I'll be sure to send word. You both laugh softly, and for a moment, the weight of the Empire's expectations fades. By late afternoon, the valley is alive with coordinated chaos. Teams at both ends shout across distances, signaling progress with flags and smoke. The first siphon chamber, a great stone basin, begins to take shape at the upper edge of the slope. It's lined with waterproof mortar, smooth as glass, ready to receive the first rush of water. Across the valley, a twin chamber awaits the rising flow, like an echo waiting for its sound. As the sun dips low, Lucius gathers the workers for a test. The channel from the source has been temporarily rerouted to feed into the first chamber. The crowd quiets, all eyes on the water. At a signal, the sluice gate creaks open. For a moment, nothing happens. Then a trickle appears, then a stream, then a full rush of water plunging down the pipe. The sound is thrilling, like thunder bottled inside the earth. A few seconds later, far across the valley, a fountain of muddy water bursts from the outlet. Chairs erupt from every side. It worked. The siphon holds. You walk the distance to the far chamber, watching the overflow cascade down the slope in tiny waterfalls. The engineers are already arguing about how to adjust the flow rate. One swears it's too fast. Another insists it's perfect. Historians still argue about that too, whether the Romans truly controlled flow or simply built and hoped for the best. As twilight falls, torches are lit along the valley's edge. The newly laid siphon glows faintly under the flickering light, a silvery serpent buried in shadow. Workers begin packing up their tools, tying ropes, and dousing small fires. The smell of cooked lentils drifts from a nearby camp, and you realize you're starving. You sit with the crew by the river, legs dangling over the embankment, sharing a bowl of stew and a loaf of bread still warm from the coals. Conversation drifts lazily between work, family, and the endless question of when the project will finally reach the city. Someone jokes that by the time it's done, half of them will be old enough to bathe in it for free. Lucius, half reclined against a pile of rope, tells another story. This one about a tunnel the Romans once dug through a mountain, starting from both ends and meeting in the middle. They say the teams found each other within a single pace, he says. Historians still argue if that's true or just pride retold as legend. He smiles faintly. But sometimes, even legends have blueprints behind them. The stars appear, reflected in the slow-moving water below. You tilt your head back, following the Milky Way arcing above the valley, its curve not unlike the aqueduct's path. For a moment, you feel the quiet symmetry of it all. Water flowing below, starlight flowing above. Both ancient, both patient. As the camp settles, you walk once more beneath the arches on the valley's far side. They loom like gateways, framing the darkness beyond. A soft wind moves through them, carrying the faint scent of stone dust and olive smoke. You imagine what it will be like when water finally crosses this whole landscape, when every pipe, every arch, every carved inscription fulfills its purpose. You pause to rest your hand on one of the piers. The stone is cool now, its rough texture grounding against your palm. You think of the thousands of anonymous hands that built it, the cutters, the haulers, the masons, the slaves who will never see Rome, yet have carried her lifeblood one block at a time. Somewhere behind you, Lucius murmurs, "When the water flows, people will call it a miracle, but it's really just work, done well." You nod silently, feeling that phrase settle deep within you like a keystone. Above, the moon rises over the new arches, silver light catching on the curve of every stone. The valley hums softly, as if remembering the day's labor. The aqueduct, still unfinished, already feels eternal. The next morning begins with the quiet confidence that follows success. The siphon worked. The arches held. And now, with the line rejoining its upward climb, the aqueduct must do something even bolder, cross the great expanse toward the city. Not on modest arches this time, but on a towering, multi-tiered bridge of stone. You stand on the edge of a hill, staring across a wide gorge where the morning mist curls like breath. Below, a river glitters in the distance, winding lazily through reeds. The engineers have already chosen the crossing point, and the first scaffolds are being raised. They look tiny from here, matchsticks against the vastness. Lucius joins you, squinting toward the horizon. "We'll build her tall," he says softly, "tall enough to make the gods jealous." You can't tell if he's joking or serious. Probably both. Down at the site, work begins with a kind of ceremonial urgency. Foremen bark orders, slaves haul ropes, carpenters climb precarious ladders. The timber framework rises in stages. First, the foundation scaffolds anchored deep into the rock. Then the skeletal ribs that will support the lower tier of arches. It's dizzying just to watch. You can already tell that this will be one of those Roman feats that tourists will one day stare up at and mutter, "How did they even do that?" "Very carefully," Lucius mutters beside you, as though reading your mind. The first course of massive stone blocks arrives by ox cart. Each one is marked with a mason symbol, a small chisel-stamped signature that will one day be invisible to everyone but the gods and archaeologists. The stones are pulled up ramps with ropes greased in pig fat, a trick the Romans swear by. You help for a while, pushing at the base of one cart, feeling the wheels grind through gravel. Your arms ache, your back protests, but the slow, deliberate rhythm is hypnotic. Above, cranes swing into place like wooden beasts with long necks, their ropes groaning as they lift the first stones skyward. The lower arches begin to take form, each keystone dropping into place with a hollow, satisfying thunk. Then, unbelievably, they begin building the second tier directly above the first. Arches stacked upon arches, a rhythm of geometry and ambition. At midday, the sun burns white overhead, and the whole structure shimmers. Workers move like ants along the scaffolds, their silhouettes stark against the glare. You climb partway up, heart thudding, until the ground looks impossibly far below. The air feels thinner here, the wind sharper, carrying the smell of lime, wood, and sweat. Lucius stands on the platform beside you, balancing casually on a narrow beam as if he were standing on solid earth. "You see how the weight pushes down?" he says, tracing the line of the arch with his hand. "Every stone presses its neighbor. The higher we go, the stronger it becomes." You glance down, not entirely convinced, until it doesn't. He laughs, the sound echoing faintly. "Ah yes, that's why I pray to Fortuna every morning." From up here, you can see the aqueduct's entire journey stretching behind you, a silver thread of channels and arches snaking across the countryside. Ahead lies the unfinished bridge, an empty gap where the river waits patiently for its crown. As the days pass, the construction becomes almost theatrical. The noise never stops. Hammer blows, shouted counts, the groan of rope and pulley. The scaffolds creak, sway, and hold. From dawn to dusk, the air vibrates with the rhythm of creation. Even the local farmers stop their work occasionally to watch, shaking their heads in disbelief. A curious group of children gathers near the site each afternoon, pointing and giggling as stones rise higher than any tree they've ever seen. One of them, a gap-toothed boy, asks you what it's for. When you explain that it will carry water to the city, he squints skeptically. Why not just carry the water in buckets? You try to explain gradients and pressure, but he's already wandered off to chase a grasshopper. The second tier finishes, and work begins on the channel itself, the specus, the sacred conduit where the water will eventually flow. It's a narrow walkway lined with waterproof mortar, smooth as marble. The masons seal every seam, every joint, because one small leak could weaken the entire structure over time. It's like building a roof, Lucius says, except it's upside down and 100 feet in the air. A few workers joke that the gods must be annoyed at this point, seeing humans build rivers that defy gravity. One of them, a superstitious old man from Gaul, leaves a small offering, a copper coin wedged into the mortar between stones. You watch silently as he does it. It's not in the official plans, but nobody removes it. Everyone understands. One evening, a cold wind blows down from the hills, shaking the scaffolds. The ropes groan and sway, and the men tie them tighter by torchlight. You sit near the fire, warming your hands as sparks dance up into the dark. Lucius is hunched over a wax tablet, making notes by flickering light. "You ever get scared?" you ask. He looks up, eyebrows raised. "Of heights or of failure?" "Both." He smiles faintly. "The heights remind me I'm alive. The failures remind me I'm mortal. Both are useful." He pauses, then adds quietly, "There was once a bridge near Segovia where the arches cracked in the first winter. Some blamed frost, others poor mortar. Historians still argue, but the truth? They rushed it, never rushed stone." The next day, the workers lift the final keystone of the upper tier, the crowning stone of the entire structure. It's small compared to the blocks below, yet symbolically, it's everything. The lifting rope creaks, the crowd holds its breath, and the moment it slots into place, a cheer erupts that rolls through the valley like thunder. Someone shouts a prayer to Jupiter. Another throws a garland of olive branches into the river below. Even Lucius lets out a small, tired laugh. "She stands," he says softly, patting one of the piers. "By the gods, she stands." You climb to the top platform once more, where the new water channel runs like a pale ribbon across the sky. The view steals your breath. The landscape spreads out in golden layers, fields, vineyards, roads, distant villages. The wind hums through the arches like a slow, deep note on a flute. You realize this is what permanence sounds like. For the finishing touch, workers install stone slabs along the top of the spacus to cover the waterway. They'll keep out leaves, animals, and the occasional curious child. You run your hand along one of the slabs, warm, smooth, timeless. It feels like the surface of memory itself. As evening falls, the bridge is complete. Torches flicker all along its length, reflected in the river below. The arches glow amber against the darkening sky, each curve a silent act of defiance against gravity. You and Lucius stand side by side, watching the last rays of sunlight paint the stones red and gold. "You know," he says quietly, "these bridges outlive us all. They'll stand when our names are gone, when even Rome forgets who built them." He chuckles. Historians will argue, of course. They always do. The sound of laughter and hammering fades as the workers drift back to camp. The night air is cool now, heavy with the scent of wet stone. Somewhere below, the river murmurs its eternal song. You close your eyes and imagine the day when water will finally flow across this bridge. Silent, steady, unstoppable. It will cross this valley as if walking on air, carrying life from distant hills to a city that never sleeps. And you'll know that every rope burn, every aching muscle, every grain of lime dust was part of something sacred. You linger a little longer under the arches before heading back to camp, feeling the hum of wind through stone one last time. It's not just a bridge now, it's a promise carved in gravity, a testament to patience and human stubbornness. And tomorrow, the water will begin its long descent toward the city. The next morning is quiet, almost reverent. The great bridge now dominates the horizon, and the valley below hums with anticipation. Today, work begins on the final stretch. The aqueducts approach into the city itself. You feel a peculiar thrill, knowing that every stone you touch will soon carry water to thousands of people, some of whom will never see the hands that built it. Lucius is already at the edge of the city's outskirts, poring over a worn map. "The last leg is always trickiest," he murmurs, tracing the route with a stylus. "Streets, foundations, and property lines. The city is a maze, and we are the river threading through it." You trudge after him through dirt paths lined with olive trees, the sound of distant merchants reaching your ears, calls, laughter, the clatter of carts. The air smells different here, dust mixed with bread, animals, and faint smoke. The countryside is calm, but the city is a living organism, pulsing with sound and smell, waiting for the aqueduct to join it. The first challenge is the transition from open arches to underground channels. Here, the aqueduct must dip beneath roads, private homes, and markets. Surveyors have mapped the streets carefully, marking every obstacle with stakes. You notice one small shrine tucked between two shops, a tiny altar dedicated to a local water spirit. Lucius gestures for you to bow your head slightly. "Never underestimate local beliefs," he whispers. "A careful step here keeps both gods and citizens happy." The excavation begins. Workers dig narrow trenches through packed earth, stones, and occasional fragments of old ruins. The city has layers, and each layer tells a story. Broken pottery, coins, even fragments of frescoes. You pause to pick one up, tracing the design with your fingers. A small dancing figure whose eyes seem to follow you. The lead surveyor leans over and nods knowingly. "History is always underfoot," he says. Meanwhile, masons prepare the stone blocks for the final channel. These are smaller than the arches outside, but no less important. Each block is carefully carved and shaped to fit snugly, forming the inner walls of the conduit. You notice how the corners are rounded, subtle, almost imperceptible curves that reduce friction and turbulence, ensuring that water will flow smoothly. Lucius explains, "Even a single sharp edge can create chaos. Water is obedient but impatient." The lead pipes are ready too, meant for sections where the aqueduct must dip beneath roads. You help lift a short section into the trench, feeling its solid weight and metallic chill. The workers use wedges and wooden frames to keep it steady while they fill the gaps with mortar. The sound of hammering and scraping echoes faintly off the city walls, blending with distant chatter and the rhythmic clip-clop of hooves. By midday, the first underground section is complete. Workers cover it with a protective layer of stone slabs, then pile earth on top, tamping it down until it's smooth. A few curious children watch from the edge of the excavation, whispering excitedly. One of them dares to poke at the soil covering the conduit, and a mason scolds gently, "If you disturb her now, she will curse your water." Everyone laughs, but there's an edge of seriousness. Even children sense that the aqueduct is no ordinary construction. Next comes the approach to the city walls. Here, the aqueduct must climb slightly to enter elevated terraces. You follow Lucius as he measures slopes with a sighting rod, adjusting tiny differences in height with meticulous care. 1 finger's width per 100 paces, he mutters, repeating the formula you've heard so many times before. The rule seems almost sacred now, the key to maintaining the flow of life itself. The city itself is alive with curiosity and caution. Merchants peek from behind stalls, watching stone and mortar rise across their streets. Some frown, others nod approvingly. A few argue over the placement of piers, claiming they block light or space. Lucius handles each objection with the patience of a saint, reminding everyone that once the water flows, life will be better for all. Historians still argue whether citizen complaints delayed construction or inspired improvements, he says quietly, and you can't help smiling at his wry observation. As the day warms, you help install the waterproof lining of the last channel sections. Mortar is mixed in small batches and pressed carefully into the walls. Masons run their hands over the surface, smoothing imperfections until the waterway gleams faintly in the sunlight. One apprentice jokes that it looks like polished ivory. You laugh, imagining future historians marveling at a gleaming Roman aqueduct and calling it divine, rather than the product of sweat and patience. The final keystone of the last arch outside the city is lifted into place by mid-afternoon. It's smaller than those in the valley, but no less significant. The workers cheer softly, and Lucius nods in satisfaction. "She's ready," he says. "Soon the water will follow her path." You follow the channel through the last street, ducking under scaffolds and over shallow trenches. The finished stones are smooth beneath your fingers. Every joint is tight, every curve deliberate. The air smells faintly of lime, clay, and the city itself, a mix of smoke, bread, and dust that somehow feels like home. By evening, the aqueduct stands complete at the city's edge, arches blending into underground channels, lead pipes hidden beneath streets, and stone slabs gleaming faintly in torchlight. Workers lounge along the last stretch, eating bread and olives, exhausted but triumphant. Lucius stands at the final entrance, surveying the whole path with quiet pride. "Tomorrow," he says softly, "we'll open her gates." You feel a thrill of anticipation. Soon, water that has traveled miles over hills, valleys, and rivers will finally flow into the heart of the city. You sit on a low wall, watching the sunset behind the arches. Shadows stretch long across the streets, framing the aqueduct like a ribbon of stone and ambition. Somewhere nearby, a child hums the same tune you've heard since the trenches, a work song that now feels like a lullaby. Lucius sits beside you, wiping sweat from his brow. "Remember," he says, "people will drink, bathe, and live because of this. Every brick, every block, every drop of mortar counts. Historians may debate the details, but the result will speak for itself." You nod, watching the city lights flicker as night falls. The aqueduct is silent now, still and patient, waiting for its first breath of water. You can imagine the first rush, cool and relentless, echoing through the arches, beneath the streets, and into the city's heart. It will be a sound that celebrates endurance, precision, and the stubborn persistence of human hands. As you close your eyes, leaning back against a smooth stone slab, you feel the weight of history and the promise of continuity. The aqueduct will outlast empires, emperors, and the countless anonymous hands that built it. Tonight, it sleeps. Tomorrow, it will sing. The next day begins with an unusual sense of anticipation in the air. The aqueduct, now fully formed into the city's edge, waits silently for its first encounter with flowing water. The early morning mist curls along the arches like thin fingers of smoke, and you breathe it in, feeling the crispness settle deep in your lungs. Today is not about lifting stones or hauling mortar. Today is about witnessing patience meet purpose. Lucius is already at the source channel, measuring water levels with meticulous care. He holds a simple wooden gauge, eyes scanning the flow as it moves steadily but cautiously. Too fast, and the pipes might burst, he mutters. Too slow, and we risk stagnation. His hand rests on the smooth stone edge, steady as though willing the water to behave. You can almost see the weight of responsibility pressing into his shoulders. Workers are stationed along the entire aqueduct, ready to observe, adjust, or intervene. The air is thick with quiet tension. You notice the pigeons hovering above the arches, silent witnesses to the day's ritual. Even the river below seems to hush, as though waiting for the aqueduct to claim its tributary. Lucius signals the opening of the sluice gate at the source. Water begins to trickle, slow at first, glinting in the early light. The channels hum softly as the first drops scrape along the stone, whispering secrets to the centuries. You lean over, cupping your hands in the flow. It is cool and clean, a gentle caress against your skin. There is a thrill in knowing that this same water will soon reach hundreds of homes in the city. As the water progresses, the sound grows, a continuous, soothing murmur, echoing under arches, through siphons, and beneath streets. Workers adjust small obstacles, ensuring smooth flow. You notice a young apprentice tracing the channel with his fingers, eyes wide with awe. It moves on its own, he whispers, as if the water is alive. Along the main bridge, the arches carry the water with effortless grace. You walk beside the spilacus, the channel smooth beneath your fingertips, feeling the energy of flow beneath your hand. The sunlight dances across the wet stones, creating shimmering patterns on the arches and the valley below. One worker jokes that the aqueduct is performing a dance only the gods can see. You chuckle quietly, letting your imagination drift along with the water. The siphon sections that cross the valleys work flawlessly. Water rushes down lead pipes, disappearing briefly underground, then surging upward again with perfect timing. You lean over one chamber, listening to the sound of rushing water as it disappears into the pipe. Lucius crouches beside you, smiling faintly. I swear, he says, even the engineers of Greece would be impressed. Historians still argue whether they fully understood siphons, but we've improved them. The final stretch into the city is just as precise. The underground channels guide the water beneath streets and into terraced basins, each step a carefully orchestrated descent. You can hear the faint murmur of market activity above, blending strangely with the gentle sound of flowing water beneath. It feels almost like the city itself is drinking, leaning in to taste the new lifeblood arriving at last. At one point, a small crowd gathers, curious citizens peering down into open inspection hatches. Their faces light up as they see the water moving through channels that have never touched human hands before. One child dips a finger into a tiny overflow basin, laughing as water trickles over it. A woman behind him murmurs a blessing, invoking Fortuna and Neptune together. You smile, realizing that even in ancient Rome, miracles are often just careful planning and a lot of patience. The workers continue their inspection along the arches and channels, checking joints, verifying slopes, and ensuring that every last leak is sealed. You notice small water splashes along a recently mortared joint. Lucius kneels, adjusting it carefully with a small brush and more mortar. Nothing escapes attention, he mutters, not while I'm alive. You think of all the hands that shaped this aqueduct before him, and it feels as if every step of history is flowing past you now. By midday, the aqueduct is fully operational. Water reaches the city, spilling into large cisterns and distribution basins. You follow the flow as it cascades gently into fountains, trickles into smaller conduits, and finally disappears into the thirsty streets. The sound is hypnotic, a constant, steady hum, almost like a lullaby sung in stone and liquid. You lean against the last arch, eyes closed, letting the motion and sound seep into your bones. Lucius joins you, holding a small cup of fresh water drawn directly from the channel. "Taste it," he says, handing it to you. You sip, and it is crisp, mineral-rich, and unmistakably alive. "Pure," you murmur. "Better than anything in the markets," he replies. "Historians argue about where the cleanest water comes from, but I say it's right here." You follow the water's journey in your mind, from distant hills to the city's heart, imagining the countless people who will bathe, cook, and drink from it. Each drop carries the weight of human effort, the sweat of countless hands, and the silent pride of engineers who understood both gravity and patience. As the sun lowers, casting long shadows across the arches, the aqueduct becomes a silver ribbon glowing in the fading light. Workers lounge along the banks and atop arches, sharing quiet conversation, bread and olives. You notice laughter ripple across the site, gentle and relieved, like the water itself celebrating. The air cools, and the first stars appear overhead. You lean back against a stone pier, feeling the vibration of flowing water beneath your hand. Somewhere in the distance, a bird cries, a single note against the low hum of the aqueduct. Lucius sits beside you, silent for a moment, watching the last glimmer of sunlight fade behind the city walls. "Tomorrow," he says softly, "people will wake to fountains running, taps filled, and baths overflowing. They'll drink, wash, and live without knowing how much work it took. But that's the way of things." You nod, feeling the truth in his words. Sometimes the greatest accomplishments are the quietest, humming beneath the surface of daily life. You take one last look along the flowing channel, tracing the water's path with your eyes. Hills, valleys, arches, siphons, underground channels, all converging into a single, unstoppable current. It's a reminder of patience, precision, and human ingenuity. The night settles gently, the water continuing its journey under moonlight. You close your eyes, listening to its steady rhythm, feeling as though the aqueduct itself is whispering the secrets of endurance, dedication, and timeless craftsmanship. The following morning greets you with a cool silver light, and the aqueduct hums softly as if proud of its accomplishment. Water moves steadily through arches, siphons, and channels, reflecting sunlight in ripples that scatter across stone like scattered diamonds. Today, your work is no longer about construction or testing. It's about maintenance, observation, and fine-tuning, the quiet art that ensures the system endures. Lucius greets you with a calm smile, holding a wooden tool you've seen before, a leveling staff with a small water-filled tube. "Even perfection needs checking," he says. "Water is honest, but mischievous. It will find flaws you didn't know existed." You trudge along the aqueduct, following him, noticing the rhythm of flow beneath your hands. The arches now feel alive, not simply stone, but conduits of life, moving relentlessly toward the city. Along the bridge crossing the valley, some of the older stones creak faintly under the water's pressure. A team of masons inspects the joints, tacking each stone to listen for hollow sounds that might indicate internal weakness. One of them jokes that the arches are singing in Morse code. You can't hear it, but the image of a chorus of stone makes you smile. Even Lucius chuckles softly at that. Down in the siphon chamber, you observe the flow through the lead pipes. The water enters with a rush, disappears underground, and surges back up as if propelled by its own determination. The pressure gauges, simple wooden devices with float indicators, wiggle slightly, a subtle reminder that even in a well-built system, nature retains some influence. Lucius adjusts one of the joints, muttering, "A gentle twist, nothing more. Too much, and we have chaos." You wander along the subterranean channels, careful not to slip on wet stone, and notice small leaks in mortar joints, almost imperceptible, yet enough to let moisture escape. Apprentices work quietly, applying additional mortar with precise strokes, smoothing edges, and polishing surfaces. The smell of wet stone mixes with the earthy scent of the city streets above, creating an oddly calming perfume. Mid-morning, Lucius gathers the engineers on a high platform, overlooking the aqueduct in its full glory. "Observe the flow," he instructs. "Notice the gradients, the velocity, the rhythm. The structure speaks to those who listen." You lean against the stone parapet, watching water glide across arches, descending gently towards siphons, disappearing under the streets, and finally cascading into the city. The motion is hypnotic, almost meditative, and you find your thoughts drifting, half to work, half to wonder. At one point, Lucius points to a small arch in the valley. "See that tiny ripple?" he says. "Could be wind, could be uneven stones, or maybe the river below sends whispers." Historians still argue whether early engineers accounted for that, or simply patched it when needed. He winks. Either way, we learn by watching. You notice something unusual. A small frog perched near a spillway, its skin glistening with droplets. It watches the water flow with perfect stillness, then leaps away when you approach. Lucius laughs softly. Even the smallest creatures respect the aqueduct, or fear it, hard to tell. By noon, you're walking along the city approach, tracing the last underground channels with your hands. Some citizens have peeked through inspection hatches, curious and cautious. A baker leans over, gesturing toward the flowing water, asking whether it will reach his ovens. Lucius reassures him, explaining how the flow will be distributed evenly into cisterns and fountains. People nod, still skeptical, still amazed. A small debate arises among the apprentices about whether the city will notice subtle variations in flow. Lucius listens quietly before saying, "The water doesn't care for opinions. It follows physics. Humans interpret." Historians still argue how much urban dwellers truly understood about it. I say, let them marvel. As afternoon arrives, you join workers adjusting the final sluices and overflow channels. Water trickles into smaller reservoirs, ensuring every neighborhood has access. Lucius explains that redundancy is key. Even if one channel fails, the others maintain supply. It's clever and practical, yet elegant. You wonder if modern engineers truly appreciate the poetry in such designs. While performing a check near one of the arches, you spot an odd pattern in the moss growing along the stone. Tiny spirals of green, shaped by the constant trickle of water, forming miniature whirlpools. You touch the moss lightly, fascinated by how life adapts to such precise, man-made structures. Lucius notices and smiles. "Even nature collaborates," he murmurs. As the sun lowers, the aqueduct glows under a soft amber light. The arches cast long shadows across the valley, mirrored faintly in the river below. Workers lounge along stone edges, chatting quietly, sipping water directly from the channel, fresh, cold, and crisp. One apprentice hums the same work song you've heard since the trenches, the tune now a lullaby for the aqueduct itself. Lucius leans beside you, resting his hands on a smooth pier. "Maintenance is gratitude," he says softly. "We keep her alive, and she keeps the city alive. Without observation, even the strongest stone is just stone." The day winds down with final inspections along the channel, adjustments to minor leaks, and the collection of tools. You take a moment to sit quietly on the arches, listening to the gentle hum of water. Somewhere beneath, in the underground channels, water continues its journey, unstoppable, constant. The rhythm is hypnotic, and you feel it in your chest, a heartbeat echoing patience and precision. As night falls, the aqueduct glows under a rising moon. The water moves silently, flowing toward the city's heart. Lucius and the workers retreat to camp, leaving the stone and liquid to settle into quiet harmony. You linger a little longer, hand on the cool stone, listening to the soft murmur, feeling as though the entire landscape has exhaled in relief. Every arch, every siphon, every joint, and every slab now speaks of centuries of effort, patience, and observation. The aqueduct is no longer simply a construction project. It is alive, breathing beneath your fingers, humming in the valley, and promising life to the city it serves. You close your eyes, letting the water's sound drift into you like a lullaby. The arches above, the valleys below, the river beyond, all converge into a quiet, steady pulse. It is a rhythm older than you, older than Lucius, and yet intimately yours for this moment. The morning begins with a gentle fog rolling across the valley, softening the edges of the aqueduct's arches and giving the stone a quiet, almost ethereal glow. You trudge along the upper channel, the faint sound of water gliding beneath your hands, and realize that today is about final touches and embellishments, those subtle details that turn function into beauty. Lucius meets you at the first arch beyond the city, holding a small chisel and a mallet. "Even the strongest aqueduct can use a little grace," he murmurs. "We've built the bones, now we give her a face." You follow him as he begins carving the faint outlines of small reliefs along the arch faces. Simple motifs, geometric shapes, and tiny symbols left by earlier masons. Each is barely noticeable unless you look closely, a hidden signature of care and pride. Workers move quietly along the arches, smoothing edges, polishing stones, and tightening joints. Some of the youngest apprentices carry small basins of water to rinse dust from the newly mortared surfaces, their movements careful and deliberate. The air smells faintly of wet stone and pine, and the hum of flowing water creates a soft background music that makes the morning feel suspended in time. "A flaw here, a bubble there," he says. "Most would ignore it, but the water sees everything." You lean in, noticing the slight depression where a block settled unevenly. With a few careful taps and a bit of mortar, the imperfection disappears. You marvel at the precision, realizing that after all the massive effort, it is these tiny corrections that preserve the aqueduct's integrity for generations. Along the city approach, workers focus on water distribution points, small cisterns and fountains that will feed neighborhoods and public baths. Each basin is lined with fine mortar, polished smooth, and checked for leaks. Lucius explains how even a minor crack can reduce flow, making life harder for those who rely on it. Historians still argue whether some ancient aqueducts failed because of poor maintenance or simple wear and tear, he adds. Either way, diligence saves lives. You follow him to a decorative feature he's particularly proud of, a small set of carved motifs along the final arch before the water enters the city. The reliefs are subtle, waves, vines, tiny representations of river gods. It strikes you how even in a utilitarian structure, Romans cared about aesthetics, embedding beauty in function. Lucius smiles, noticing your gaze. "Even water deserves poetry," he says. Midday arrives, and the sun glints off the smooth stone, creating sparkling reflections on the flowing water below. Workers pause for a brief meal, bread and olives passed hand to hand, laughter and quiet conversation filling the air. You sit on the edge of an arch, letting your fingers trail along the specus, feeling the constant pulse of water beneath. It's hypnotic, meditative, a rhythm older than yourself yet intimately present. As the day warms, the focus shifts to minor adjustments along the final siphon sections, those delicate underground pipes that ensure water rises perfectly to city terraces. You help guide a lead pipe into place, its smooth metallic surface glinting in the sun. The masons apply mortar carefully, smoothing every joint, double-checking the seal. A small crowd of citizens watches from above through inspection hatches, their faces alight with curiosity and wonder. "It's alive, isn't it?" Lucius nods, smiling faintly. "In a way, yes. Water flows and the aqueduct listens. Every careful hand ensures harmony. That's how it survives centuries." You think about the countless engineers, slaves, and masons who built, maintained, and refined this structure, the invisible chorus that keeps life flowing. By afternoon, all structural adjustments are complete. Lucius gathers the team along the city approach, checking every slope, every channel, every cistern. He nods with quiet satisfaction. "The aqueduct is ready," he announces softly. The water hums beneath your hands, calm, steady, obedient. You feel a swell of pride mixed with awe, aware of your own small part in something timeless. Before leaving the site, Lucius leads you to a final observation point atop the upper arches. You look down at the flowing water, the city below, and the hills in the distance. Shadows lengthen, the sun casting golden light across stone and river. The aqueduct stretches endlessly, a ribbon of life threading through valleys, forests, and streets. You notice the tiny reliefs on the arch faces catching the light, water glinting in the basins, moss clinging to shaded corners, the gentle ripple along the edges of the specus. The effect is subtle but profound, a reminder that beauty and function are not mutually exclusive. The aqueduct is now not just a conduit of water, but a testament to care, patience, and artistry. As dusk approaches, Lucius speaks quietly. Tomorrow, the city will wake to water flowing in its fountains and baths. Children will splash in the cisterns, women will draw clean water for cooking, and the empire will continue without a thought for the hands that made it possible. That's the way of the world. You lean back against the stone, listening to the hum of water, feeling the arches steady beneath you. Somewhere below, in underground channels, water continues its inexorable journey. Above, the stars begin to appear, their light mirrored faintly on the surface of the flowing stream. The aqueduct, alive with movement, yet eternal in its stone, seems to exhale a soft, contented sigh. Tonight, the structure rests. Tomorrow, it will serve. You close your eyes, letting the gentle murmur of flowing water carry you into quiet contemplation, a lullaby of stone and liquid, of human patience and persistence. The morning air is soft and cool, carrying the faint scent of damp stone and olive trees. Today is not for construction, not for adjustment, but for witnessing the aqueduct in full life, as water courses from distant hills into the heart of the city. You follow Lucius along the upper arches, the hum of flow beneath your fingers like a gentle heartbeat, each ripple a reminder of everything that has been built and endured. As you step carefully along the stones, you see the first signs of human delight. A baker draws water for his ovens, smiling at the simple miracle of it all. Children splash in small fountains, their laughter echoing faintly beneath the arches. Merchants fill basins outside their shops, whispering thanks to the gods while marveling at the precision that delivers life so effortlessly. The city, alive and bustling, now drinks from a source it never had before, and you can feel the pulse of civilization synchronized with flowing water. Lucius walks beside you, silent for a moment, watching the activity below. Every arch, every siphon, every channel was a promise, he says softly. A promise that life continues, that the city thrives, that work, patience, and care are not forgotten. Historians still argue whether Romans foresaw every challenge, but we see the result. You lean over the parapet, tracing the flow with your hands. The water glimmers, reflecting the sun in shifting diamonds. A slight breeze ruffles your hair, carrying distant sounds, a merchant bargaining, a dog barking, the faint hum of wheels along cobbled streets. You realize that the aqueduct is more than a conduit. It is a symphony of stone, water, and life. Every element plays its part, unseen by most, but essential to the whole. The siphon chambers work flawlessly. Water dives underground, pressed by gravity through lead pipes, only to re-emerge with perfect timing, filling reservoirs and cisterns. Apprentices watch in awe, whispering about the magic of flow. You kneel beside one of them, explaining how the pressure works, how gradients and careful construction allow the water to climb again. The child nods, eyes wide, perhaps realizing for the first time the beauty in precise planning and labor. By midday, the aqueduct hums with life from source to city. Lucius guides you through each cistern, each overflow channel, and every final distribution point. Fountains spill gently into courtyards, baths fill with clear, sparkling water, and homes that once relied on wells now have running supply. You feel a quiet pride, knowing that your presence, your labor, even your small observations contributed to this moment. A gentle conversation drifts through the arches as workers and apprentices discuss minor adjustments for future maintenance. Lucius listens, nodding, offering guidance without interrupting the flow of ideas. Maintenance, he says, is the real testament of endurance. Even the best-built aqueduct needs care, just as a city needs vigilance. Without attention, time finds weaknesses. With it, it thrives. You wander back along the bridge crossing the valley, pausing to watch water slip over the edge of the last arch before it enters the city. The liquid catches sunlight like molten silver, moving in perfect rhythm. Somewhere nearby, a bird dips and glides along the channel, and you realize that life, human, animal, and vegetal, has adapted around this man-made river. Even the wind seems to move in time with the flow. Lucius crouches beside a small relief on one of the arch faces, tracing the carved vines with a finger. "They will last long after we are gone," he whispers. "The water, the stone, the craft, they endure. Future generations will marvel, touch the stone, drink the water, and wonder at who built it. And they will not know our names." Perhaps that is the point. The day slowly fades, and the aqueduct glows under the soft amber light of the setting sun. The water continues its journey unceasingly, flowing with quiet confidence, filling reservoirs, fountains, and baths. You walk along the arches one last time, letting your fingers brush the smooth stones, tracing the paths of both water and human effort. Somewhere below, in a quiet corner, an apprentice hums the work song you've heard since the trenches, transformed now into a lullaby for the aqueduct itself. The arches seem to echo it back, a gentle vibration through stone and air. You close your eyes, listening to the hum of flowing water, the faint whispers of wind, and the distant laughter of children. Everything is calm, harmonious, enduring. The night settles gradually, soft and comforting. The aqueduct, alive with the rhythm of water, seems to exhale, its arches glowing faintly in moonlight. You sit quietly, leaning against a pier, allowing your thoughts to drift with the liquid thread beneath. The work is complete. The structure stands, not merely as stone and mortar, but as a testament to patience, precision, and human care. And now, as your own day draws to a close, you can imagine the water flowing quietly through the night, nourishing the city, soothing the earth, and carrying the legacy of every hand that touched it. The hum of the aqueduct lulls you gently. You feel yourself slowing, settling, becoming one with the rhythm of stone and water. The arches above and the river below seem to cradle you in a soft embrace, reminding you that work, patience, and attention to detail create not just life, but quiet, enduring beauty. Let your mind drift with the current. Imagine the city bathed in silver moonlight, fountains gurgling softly, and water slipping into every cistern. The rhythm, the hum, the gentle murmur, It carries the weight of centuries and the lightness of life itself. Sleep now, wrapped in the calm pulse of flowing water, in the arches and valleys, in the tireless hands of those who built and maintained. Let the memory of stones, river, and labor carry you into dreams as smooth and steady as the aqueduct itself. The evening deepens, and the aqueduct rests under a blanket of stars. The water continues its steady course, gliding over stone, slipping through channels, and disappearing into the city's heart. You feel a slow, gentle release in your chest, as if the rhythm of flow has synchronized with your own. Every sound, the distant murmur of water, the soft rustle of leaves, the faint night breeze, becomes a lullaby. You imagine the arches silhouetted against moonlight, the valley below calm and still, and the distant hills resting after the day's labor. The city sleeps, oblivious to the invisible river threading life through it. And that is the beauty. The aqueduct endures quietly, faithfully, providing without demand, moving with patience and grace. Every stone, every joint, every curve now carries centuries of effort, care, and attention. You can feel it in the cool touch of masonry beneath your fingers, in the soft vibration of flowing water, in the shadows stretching across the arches. The hum is constant, soothing, and reassuring. Let your mind drift slowly, like water over stones, gentle and persistent. Picture the city's fountains, the household cisterns, the baths quietly filling, all nourished by unseen hands and tireless labor. Imagine the night settling around the aqueduct, softening edges, blending sound and shadow, turning everything into a gentle, steady rhythm. Breathe slowly, deeply, in time with the flow. The aqueduct carries life, and in its hum, you carry calm. Let the water's movement lull your thoughts, releasing tension, carrying you gently into rest. The arches, the valleys, the flowing river, they cradle you, whispering of endurance, patience, and the quiet beauty of human care. Sleep now, in harmony with stone and water, as the aqueduct flows, timeless and serene, beneath the moon and stars. Sleep now, sweet dreams,